I'm sorry. I was waiting for some funny noise, fireworks or something indicating to me as the facilitator that the webinar had started. You're all very welcome today to this webinar on how deploying diversified environmental disclosures drives long-term value. This webinar is brought to you by CECP's CEO Investor Forum and Business in the Community, and we are delighted to be working together today. So we have an hour to really learn from each other and share insights. And we're hoping you're going to be super active using the chat box, sending questions. We have a brilliant panel, and then we have time for a great Q&A, so get super active. We are recording this session. We want to share it widely. And after the session, we are going to be sharing the recording and also some material that may be useful to you. And perhaps I should introduce myself as well. I am Maria Jose Subiela. I am Director for Global Goals at Business in the Community. So let's get started. As you can see in the agenda, we are first going to explore a little bit the investor's perspective. Then we are going to explore the corporate's perspective. And finally, we are going to be asking some of your questions to our brilliant panel. If capital is allocated responsibly and responsible business are favored by investors in terms of the allocation of capital, we are clearly creating the right incentives for a better world, for a world in which we can meet the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. This year, in the middle of this actually crazy year, at Business in the Community, we interview more than 100 CEOs. We work with 500 expert contacts, trying to figure out how responsible business could have a central role in this world with COVID and as we emerge from COVID to build back responsibly. And clearly, responsible investment was identified as one of the key levers to create responsible business action at scale and pace. And this is why I'm so excited that today we're going to use this hour to really explore responsible investment. We're going to be focusing on environmental disclosures, and we're going to try to push it to disclosures beyond carbon. But of course, we know social, environmental, and governance, they are all interlinked. So let's start by bringing to this virtual stage our first two great panelists. I'm delighted to have here today Alexa Geet, who is Head of Sustainable Finance at CCP's CEO's Investors Forum. Hi, Alexa. And Leon Kami, who is Head of Responsibility at Federated Hermes and a member of the Global Goals campaign at Business in the Community. So wonderful to have you both.
Thank you, Maria Jose.
Great. So I'm going to start by throwing at you a few questions. We have little time, we have 15 minutes for this first lot, so you're not going to be able to answer them all, but just to shape your contribution, we're going to start with Alexa and then move to Leon and then bounce back and forth. So I'm keen to explore how do investors use environmental disclosures? How do they source data? If a business needs to prioritize a framework, what would that be? In a different session on responsible investment this morning, someone was saying, this is an alphabet soup of rules, standards, regulations. This is moving really fast. How can companies position themselves to meet your expectations and align with their environmental related objectives? And looking at the long term, a little bit looking into the crystal ball, what's your take on standardization and how environmental related disclosures will be shifting? So a lot of questions and big ones, but anyways, let's get started. Alexa, over to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Maria Jose. And again, thrilled to be partnering with Business in the Community today on this very timely topic. And we have a lot of ground to cover. Just want to start off by clarifying that at CEO Investor Forum, we work to empower CEOs and their corporate executives to more effectively communicate their long-term strategies directly to investors. And we do this through our long-term plan framework, which includes opportunities, of course, for them to disclose on their environmental strategies and impact goals to investors. So really demystifying, what the requirements are and what the demand is from investors and how they're utilizing ESG data to inform their investment decision-making process. Our long-term plan framework is informed by SASB, Sustainability Accounting Standards Board. It's a great place to start. I'll get into that in a second. And we have plans later this year to update our long-term plan framework using TCFD for many reasons, but with the pressing climate change challenges that corporates and society is facing, it's time for TCFD to really take the reins in terms of the reporting that we're seeing. We really see environmental disclosures being relevant to a number of our framework's 9 macro themes. Some of these include trends, risks and opportunities, and one I wanted to highlight was competitive strategic positioning, because a lot of companies are starting to recognize that disclosing specifically on environmental issues is really almost a sort of competitive advantage. It really sets you apart from the rest. Investors want to know you're looking around the corner to plan ahead and not just dealing with the challenges of climate or society, some of the social justice issues we're having today, but you're really anticipating different types of scenarios, which TCFD does a great job now with their scenario planning at outlining how corporates can report on that. So in terms of what frameworks we encourage companies to adopt to meet stakeholder, that no longer just includes investors, but also communities, suppliers, consumers, it's stakeholder capitalism. We encourage that they really prioritize, like, again, the first stop should be the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board. That's where a company can identify their material ESG issues for their specific industry. And also, again, TCFD with their scenario planning is really putting those metrics into action and giving investors a new kind of understanding of how they would enact on some of those commitments should challenges become more intense. Well, I did want to just raise, before handing it off to Leon for his perspective, that companies are, what we're hearing from companies is that they're unclear about whether climate has taken the back seat for investors amid this COVID pandemic, and that's a very just question to have. The Edelman Trust Barometer just came out with their updated survey results, and they found that 79% of their US respondents said that their firms are temporarily deprioritizing ESG as an investment criteria amid COVID-19. However, and I emphasize this, as the world shifts into recovery mode, hopefully soon, we'll see how the winter goes, 96% said that they expect their firms to increasingly go back to prioritizing ESG, which includes climate change related metrics. So I'll pause there. Sorry, Maria Jose, you're on mute. Maybe we can get Leon's comments on the same question.
We were both unmuted. Leon, over to you.
Good to hear what you had to say, Alexa, and let me see if I can build on what you've said. So as an investor, when we think about environmental considerations, we do use some quite high level data to focus where we might our attention. And so if we're looking at say a portfolio of holdings, we'll look at where the carbon emissions are in the portfolio. We'll try and understand how big those carbon emissions are relative to other companies in an individual sector. And we start to get an understanding of the footprint of our portfolio and also the individual footprints of the different holdings. And one tries to measure that in some ways, how carbon efficient are they? And there's no perfect way of doing this. But you could look at carbon emitted relative to sales as a way of trying to see how efficient a company might be. But that's not really enough in any shape or form, because we need to really understand from a bottom-up way how those individual companies are emitting their carbon and why they're in that situation. To what extent is that emission structural? Is it structurally advantageous, disadvantageous? So we want to get a little better understanding in terms of that. And then thinking about the specific sector which one is in, because I believe that each sector needs to achieve net zero, one way or the other. There's no sector which shouldn't try and achieve net zero. Some have more of a challenge to get there than others. But there are ways of, if you like, absorbing the carbon which one might be emitting. the path is going to be different for different sectors. And there was an excellent report, which I think came out today, I saw it yesterday, from the IIGCC, which a colleague, Nick Spooner, contributed to, on the power industry. And there it lays out how the power industry might move towards net zero. There's talk in the supply chain about the importance of copper and silicon as important ingredients in terms of renewable power. The importance of actually developing solar plants. You know, can't just happen overnight. So some of these things need to be put in place now. And then quite a bracing statistic that 70% of emissions in the power industry is coal, still 70%. And that represents just over a quarter of all the emissions in the world. So they're clearly, from a generation point of view, one needs to move out of coal and move into renewables. Again, that requires quite a lot of preparation to happen. We just had our own Prime Minister here in the UK putting out a 10-point plan. He has an editorial in the Financial Times this morning about it. And one of the things which he talks there about is about being able to, I think it was by 2030, being able to provide wind generated power to every household in the UK. So there's quite a lot which the power industry needs to move there. And there's also something from a demand point of view. The power industry shouldn't only focus on how it is generating power, but also has the ability to influence its customers and thinking about how the customers use power. And clearly buildings is a large part of where the power goes. And so we would expect the power industry to be working with its supply chain, with its customers to help there. Now that's power, at least as we see it today. Each industry needs to think about where it's going, and then each company within that industry needs to see how well positioned it is to take advantage. How is this environmental revolution going to attack or tackle its business model, and how might one want to change the business model? This is not about emissions cutting. Of course it is about emissions cutting, but it's thinking more strategically about how to reduce those emissions. So as investors, that's how we're thinking about it. We believe that stewardship is a very important role which investors play. And so it is for us to advocate for government, work with other investors in groups such as IIGCC, and indeed CECP and BITC, and also to engage with the individual company entities to encourage them to take a net zero path.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Leon. I love your points about the different paths from different sectors, but all of them having to come on board. And Alexa, your points about demystifying requirements. Perhaps we can now focus a bit on the environmental disclosures beyond carbon. I mean, what do you see coming or happening? Of course, we all know that there is now the Task Force for Nature financial disclosure, trying to imitate the success or the increasing success of TCFD. Alexa, what do you see coming in the horizons of what our investors are going to be paying attention to in terms of environmental disclosures and go beyond carbon? And then we can go to Leon.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Leon touched on, he previewed some of it. My thoughts are, that long-term change requires capital, and to shift to a low carbon economy, companies don't necessarily have that budget allocated or planned. So if we want to shift from beyond carbon tracking, which ironically is our theme today, I think we'll see much more financial metrics emerging alongside environmental disclosures for investors to truly understand whether the company is investing in necessary changes. So it's almost as though it's the new R&D. And they're going to be looking at the numbers, not just these big commitments. And, I commend companies all the time on coming out publicly with these commitments to go net neutral by 2030, by 2050. However, it needs to reflect in their financials. It needs to reflect in their earnings calls. The way they're communicating their step-by-step plan to get there is equally as critical as that initial commitment. So again, the necessary changes, especially if you're just looking to invest in a new sustainable solution that will help with the recharge of global climate change challenges, the brand or lines of businesses across the entire organization, it's finding new ways to raise capital to allocate towards those innovative, sustainable solutions. And one thing, especially on the sustainable finance perspective, we're seeing a lot is companies harnessing capital markets to fundraise through social green bonds, especially green bonds, given the topic today, and sustainability bonds. So keep an eye out for that. I think that long-term, they're going to be accessing capital more frequently through the capital markets.
That's fascinating. And there's a lot about link bonds, a new structure of bonds. That it's
exactly
really fascinating trend. Leon, your thoughts?
I mean, other environmental disclosures, and I've got to stress that disclosures are the means, not the ends. The end is to have a more environmentally friendly world. So I think energy efficiency is really important. And one of the SDG goals around affordable and clean energy, one of the sub goals is about improving energy efficiency. And at least on the SDG website, they're talking about it only having improved by 1.7%, and that's below what they were really trying to achieve, which was potentially 3% or more energy efficiency. And energy efficiency is really important because the global needs for energy are just going to continue to grow. But there's huge opportunity in properties and elsewhere to improve energy efficiency. So I think metrics or disclosure around energy efficiency, I think it's going to be very important. For different areas, water has to be important. And the need for this will differ depending on how the climate evolves, but there's certain parts of the world where clearly water is a very scarce resource. And it's something which I think it would be useful to know more and more about the water footprints of different companies. And then the third example I would give sort of goes around the circular economy. So if I think about fashion, which is it's not an expertise of mine, fashion necessarily. I heard a frightening statistic that 80% of returns are binned. So we have a situation where we're buying more and more online, but 80% of what you receive online, which you return, doesn't survive, which is crazy. The fashion, fast fashion may well go out of fashion as consumers become much more aware of the environmental impact their purchases are having, that we should maybe be making purchases which we use for longer or use more often. I mean, it's not only in fashion. So in terms of disclosures for a retail company, a fashion retail company, I'd be looking for information on those returns, on how often people might wear the clothes which they have, or whether it's sort of 3 months and then it goes in the bin. Those wedding dresses, how, are they passed on to other users? So I think there's going to be more information from that point of view. I mean, the other impact of fast fashion is it increases the level of distribution costs, and we know how much distribution costs in terms of emissions with the trucks and the lorries and the like. So there's some ideas of where other disclosures which could be helpful.
Maria Jose, I might just jump in. I have one more comment, kind of building on Leon's comments. And my friends at the Environmental Defense Funds would not let me go if I didn't mention it, but the increasing demand for corporates to take a stronger role in public policy, especially here in the US. We're expecting regulations to change a bit when Biden takes office, and it's walking the talk. It's no longer just about disclosures, but how can you enact those and get a seat on the table, or at least, as they say, get on the menu for really being an advocate as a corporate with your credibility, your clout, to really push public policy in the direction that helps climate change get resolved.
That's a fantastic addition. Thank you very much, Alexa. Alexa, Leon, thank you so much. We will have you back in 15 minutes. You can drink a cup of coffee while we have Catherine and David on this virtual stage. Thank you.
Thank you.
So let me introduce you to Catherine Dalton, who is Vice President for Global Corporate Responsibility at Intercontinental Hotels Group and a member of the Global Goals Leadership Team, and Dr. David Dempsey, SVP Corporate Relations EMEA for Salesforce, also a company that supports the Global Goals campaign. And yesterday we announced that the new chairman of Business in the Community is Gavin Patterson from Salesforce. I just thought I would mention that. Catherine and David, wonderful to have you here today. Thank you very much. So we were trying to get into the brains of the investors now, and now let's see how you're experiencing this from the corporate side. And again, I'm going to throw at you a few questions and ask you, Catherine, to start and give us some reflections. Then we will go to David and we will bounce from each other. So the wide range of reporting metrics can cause confusion. How are you prioritizing disclosure frameworks? What non-carbon related environmental issues and disclosures are you focusing on? How is the whole requirements of TCFD in terms of scenario planning and in general having an impact on business thinking, business planning? And then again, if we can look a bit into the future and do a bit of guesswork, there is an emerging focus on biodiversity and nature, and how do you see this reporting evolving in general? So yes, let's see, how are you responding to the changing expectations of investors?
Okay, thanks, MJ, and hi everyone. So undoubtedly, ESG disclosures requirements are under more scrutiny than ever. And I think that has created an active market for ESG service providers. So I know I'm not alone in saying that, you know, it can be difficult at times to navigate all the many requests that we get for data and surveys, etc., etc. So I think for us, we've taken a step this year where we've put in a specific committee, a working group, to look at what should we be reviewing. So on a quarterly basis, a combination of my team, investor relations, COSEC legal, will actually get together, look at our ratings, look at our approach and our engagement, think about all the public disclosures that we have and how we can improve those. We've also prioritized our approach to the various ratings and disclosures. So there are some that we will proactively engage with. So the ones that we think are important to investors, we will proactively provide data to those. And I've reviewed quite a few recently. There are some then that we will only respond to on a reactive basis. So ones that we think are less important, but we don't want the information to be incorrect. And then we do participate in various indices that we know are important for our investors and our corporate accounts. And then obviously all the proxy advisors ahead of annual reporting season. So we've actually taken this approach to try and cut down the amount of time taken. And I think also the various initiatives that are out there from a reporting alignment perspective, we welcome as well, because I think that is another, while SASB is one framework, there are many, many others, and that can be difficult to navigate. From an environmental disclosure perspective, I mean, IHG, we have over 5,900 hotels, and it's predominantly a franchise model. So we are not operating those hotels. We do not own those hotels, but still they are an important part of our footprint. So it's very much about influencing those hotel owners to take action. So energy is a really big focus of ours. It's a massive cost at hotel level. We have a big global footprint. But also for us, waste is a very, very important area, especially single-use items. And we were the first hotel company to come out with a commitment to get rid of the little bottles. So we're working through that at the moment. And that's a bit of a marker in the sand, really, because there's so much more that the industry as a whole can do. Food waste is another very big area for us. So thinking about how we can partner with innovators and NGOs to reduce waste. So partners like Oz Harvest in Australia, who take food from our hotels and give to local communities, and using technology such as Winnow that helps the hotels actually track, measure and reduce their food waste. So there's a lot of focus there. also water as well, as you can imagine, is very big for us. And it's not just about reducing footprint within the hotels, it's actually thinking about this localized approach at the catchment level. So how can we work with the local community to transfer our learnings to really help with that intervention at that wider level. In terms of TCFD, so we just kicked our TCFD project off a couple of months ago. So we're relatively new in the process. We've conducted our readiness review and spent some time really thinking about our methodology for identifying the relevant physical and transition risks. And I think we're taking a very strategic approach to it, thinking about how this really will interact with our wider enterprise risks longer term and help to improve the resilience of the business. So it's happening. We're having some good interactions with our group executive and board. So we're doing the bulk of the quantification next year. And then in investor expectations, I mean, I think clearly through COVID, and it was interesting what Alexa was saying, because certainly for us, we really sort of ramped up our efforts on the S of ESG and thinking about how we could support our communities during COVID. So we did put on the back burner some of our environment initiatives, short-term ones, but sort of kept things ticking along. But really, actually, in the last couple of months, as you know, you see governments sort of stepping up their ambitions when it comes to environment, we've cranked back up our activities and sort of are really thinking about what long-term steps we need to take. We announced a science-based target in February, so we're sort of now well on our way to the planning how we're going to meet that.
Fantastic. Yeah, and you are very much embedded in your community, so it made sense, the reprioritization, and now it's good to see good signals of going back to a focus on environment. Before I pass to David, just a practical questions. When you say you prioritize those surveys or indices, standards that your investors most care about, how did you find out what your investors were more interested in?
We asked them. Predominantly, we did do in combination with our investor relations team, and just sort of general feedback that we received from sort of some of our advisors as well. They were very helpful in terms of what they thought were the most widely used ratings, for example.
Oh, fantastic, thank you. So David, over to you.
Jose, nice to talk. Yeah, I'm well, like you, I think pretty much everything that's been said by Alexa, Leon, and Catherine, because if you look at a company like Salesforce, we're 21 years old this year. And, you know, we started as a cloud-based computing company, and, you know, now cloud is ubiquitous, but the reality is that cloud started as a subscription, software as a service model. And that meant that our subscriptions, you know, were built on trust, because we were asking our customers right from the very start to trust us with their data. And if they didn't, they had this ultimate power of walking away from us. So, you know, this core value of trust is one that's been with us for 21 years, but now really is coming to its own as we get into this scenario now where we're being entrusted with the planet, businesses like ourselves, entrusted with a platform for change for the planet. So, you know, we're very focused and very supportive of science-based targets and, you know, of the reportings, the SASB or TCFD reporting structure, because we think that businesses need to be open and need to share with the communities that they're part of and need to earn the trust of their communities and of their stakeholders. You know, we believe that shareholder capitalism really is over, and that stakeholders, you know, are the real drivers of the success of companies now. So I think that we're very comfortable in this space and, you know, really believe that we have a platform for change that the world needs right now. So I think that, you know, when you look at the reporting that we do now, you know, most of our reporting is we report the very obvious things about our power usage, about our carbon footprint, about our sustainability efforts, but we also are very open and voluntarily report on other things like, for example, our commitment to equality and to workforce development and to inclusion. And we do all of our reporting through our stakeholder impact report. So this is our annual report, which we bring out, and it sets out our ESG reporting structures and our responses to the SDGs and how we tie back to them. And we publish that every year and publish it as part of our 10K filing as well. We're a massive believer in science-based targets. And I think that what we really like is that, if you look at where we are now, that, the initiatives I saw, the initiative that came today from the UK government, where they're going to stop selling electric car or diesel and petrol cars by 2030. But the challenge is that 2050 for governments is quite far out. It's somebody else's term, it's somebody else's office. And we think that for business, and the reporting, particularly for business, the reporting that we're talking about here, it puts business in a place of where we're immediately held accountable. We're held accountable every year, and we can't hide behind the fact that 2050 is 30 years out. And that's why we really like the fact that we have to report next year on what we've done, in our current fiscal, what we've done to help the planet and help climate, and we'll have to report for 30 years. And we think that brings an immediacy to businesses that puts us in a much more urgent position and forces us to really get stuff done now, rather than hiding behind this long-term option that some governments will hide behind. So we very much are supporters of voluntary reporting, but of science-based reporting like the SASB and TCFD type reporting.
It's brilliant, David. And you mentioned science-based targets, and also, it's interesting that they are developing the methodology to also certify nature disclosures, which is, I think, it's going to be transformational. Do you see specific disclosures affecting your sector? And in advance, I want to apologize. My computer is playing up, so I keep freezing. I hope I don't disappear.
I think you're fine. Thank you.
If I disappear, Alexa, please save the date, but hopefully I won't. So David, going back to the question, it was about particular beyond carbon disclosures that you think will affect your sector, the technology sector. Is there anything in particular that you see happening?
Yeah, well, we think that, pretty much all of our ESG reporting needs to be out there. And, the obvious things are the carbon. We have a carbon neutral cloud, and where our renewable sources of energy by 2022, all of our energy used will be from renewable sources. But we think that we have a massive part to play in other disclosures, how we measure things that we sign up to, maybe like, for example, we're part of the 1 Trillion Trees org, so, we believe that for the planet to save itself, or for the planet to be saved, that really there's so many initiatives that have to come together. And we think that when you sign up groups like ourselves and we publicly commit to what we're going to do, our energy commitments, or our scope 1 and 2 and scope 3 commitments, that those things, when we sign to those and publicly put them into the public domain, we think it's massively important. Because when you look at companies like ours and, Catherine's company and the other companies, we're quite privileged in that we're big businesses and we're successful. But we think that we have a massive influence as well into our supply chain. And when you look at things like our purchasing power, and Catherine mentions this, the purchasing power of IHG Group, or our own purchasing power, that we can really be a catalyst for our suppliers to think about carbon, because it's somewhat easier for us who are privileged and who are doing well to focus on it. But for the other businesses who are in our supply chain, or the other parts of the world who are struggling with more mundane things, that for us to encourage them to look at their carbon footprints, and if they want to do business with us or continue to business with us, that they look at their carbon footprints as well. So I think those type of disclosures, I think, are really important to companies like ours as well. But science-based, I think, is key to it.
Fantastic, thank you. Catherine, any comments before we ask the rest of the panelists to come back?
Yeah, I mean, for us and the hotel industry, I think it's the main points that I talked about, really. It's about waste and water. And what's great about our industry is that we work very closely as an industry, and I think that's really important from a collaborative perspective. So Sustainable Hospitality Alliance, American Hotel Lodging Association, they're all forums in which we come together to work as peers to sort of, we have developed measurement tools for water, for carbon, best practices when it comes to anti-human trafficking. So I think there's a lot that we do as an industry together smaller players. So I think it's those areas that we're all now focusing on.
That's brilliant.
I think that, Jay, as well, the other thing that we really all can do is the policy advocacy, because, you know, really we need to use our business voices to advocate for policies and to get those policies implemented now rather than on the long foot. It's too easy to push stuff back, and yet the crisis is right now. So, you know, our voices as policy influencers, I think, are key from a business point of view.
Excellent. Absolutely. And so can I ask Leon and Alexa to come back? Catherine, I think you have your camera off now, or it may be my laptop.
On from my end.
Okay. I tell you, something is wrong with my computer. I don't even dare to touch the Q&A in case everything disappears. Okay. So do we have Alexa and Leon on? I feel like I'm driving blind.
You do.
You are.
Hi, yes, we're here.
Yeah.
Excellent. So I have the same question for all of you to get us started. It kind of touches with some of the points that were made by David and Alexa around policymakers. But if we were to simplify the world to policymakers, consumers, investors, and corporates, what do you think that it needs to happen to accelerate the pace of responsible investment, to make it the norm, to make investment responsible investment? If you do use the word collaboration or cooperation, you need to do it with an example, so something tangible, or what do you mean by that? So perhaps I can start with Alexa.
Yeah, sure thing. That's a great question. On CCP, CEO Investor Forum, what we look to do is really help corporates break down silos internally. You know, if you want the robust reporting that investors are demanding, you're going to need to get data from different departments. That's just a given. And right now, it's not just housed inside the CSR, corporate social responsibility. It's in the sustainability teams. It's in the human resource teams. We also see enterprise risk management really taking a stand for the data that they're producing on the risk and opportunities within the firm. So it's really a partnership internally that we're seeing, as well as partnering, of course, which I'm sure other panelists will speak to, with external partners to really accelerate change through their product lines, their branding, and ultimately how they're servicing the communities from within which they operate, and the consumers. And the consumer behavior is changing as well. You see a lot more conscious consumerism. Every brand now, you go to the supermarket and almost every brand has their sustainable line. That's just showing that they're understanding that the consumer is looking for more green and sustainable products. So it's not just, you know, in the capital markets with the investors, but also the consumers, and again, the rise of stakeholder capitalism. So I just wanted to make a point that looking inward, making sure that your company is talking to each other, that's really important in solidifying a long-term plan. And we work to break that down and make sure everyone's talking to each other. And that information ultimately gets rolled up into investor relations, who communicates it more directly with the investor audience.
Jeff, if I might expand on Alexa's point there and give you a good example of internally how that manifested for us. You know, we had a situation where we wanted to report on our internal usage of carbon, and it meant this, exactly as Alexa pointed out, that it meant this massive job of collecting all these data points from all around the different points in the company. And, you know, we did that for years, the same as other companies, but then we started using our own technology to do it and pulled it all into Salesforce. And that manifested as a Sustainability Cloud, which was an internal product for us to measure our own carbon footprint. But we've now made that available to our 200,000 customers around the world. And it's a generic product, if you like, that allows each company to measure its own carbon footprint. In our case, it's data usage or it's a power usage or it's travel. But in Catherine's case, it may well be the properties, to measure the footprints of the properties. But by making this trusted source of science-based data available to as many companies as we can around the world, I think that's the way that we get this true data that really, you know, we can take action against, and it needs to be science-based.
Can I pick up on another point that Alexa made? Was, I think that the customer focus bit for us, I think we've certainly stepped up our ambitions over the last 18 months, and I think that's predominantly been driven by the increasing investor focus that's been put on this area. But I think now we're starting to see many more customers really care about this, and for us, you know, we see that through our big corporate customers. So, you know, when they send in their RFPs, they're asking for more and more data that we disclose through CDP, for example. So with that's a noticeable change, and it's less easy to track for sort of smaller individual customers. But also, I think for us, it's our own colleagues are driving a huge amount of change. You know, we see now that people want to work for a company where they truly believe that they're doing some good. So that is another major driver for us.
Brilliant. And I hear a lot of sustainability teams now sitting next to the virtually sitting before COVID, sitting in physical space next to their investor relations team. So really joining the dots internally, which is some of the points you are making. Leon, any reflections on that?
Couple of reflections on the demand and supply side. So I think there's insufficient consumer education at the moment. So for the first time, I've been involved in this area for some time. I looked at our own family's carbon footprint last week. She's a bit late, should have done it earlier. And I had no idea what was going to come out. Of course, I knew that travel and energy was going to be parts of it, and they were quite big parts of it. But I didn't know that if I was a vegan, I would emit, or we as a family would emit, more than half the carbon than if we were a heavy meat-eating family. And we're not a heavy meat-eating family, we're somewhere in the middle. But it's quite a significant level of carbon which one's emitting. Travel, I mean, I can't remember, there's 4 or 5 times difference in terms of the amount per mile you emit if you go by rail versus going by car. So thinking about the Uber decision when you're working late one evening rather than just jumping in the tube, again, it's just that consumer awareness. And then, you know, the travel, the flight, if you're privileged enough to take a number of holidays, then do you go for longer holidays? Less, because the emissions from travel, from flights, is unbelievably high. So I think there needs to be significant consumer education. I think the consumer also needs to be helped, because energy is a very important and a very expensive part of a pensioner's bundle of what they spend money on. And at least in the transition, energy is going to cost more as one moves more to renewables. It's got to. So I heard an idea, I think, from Bob Letterman once, which was, why not charge the companies for the carbon emissions and then redistribute that in a kind of progressive subsidy to the citizens of a country, and that way they'll be able to afford more the transition, because this transition needs to be afforded. The last thing we want to do is get climate change under control and impoverish significant sections of society. So there, those are some thoughts on the demand side, but I've spoken too much, so I won't go to supply side.
I love your point on a just transition. I have another question from the audience. Someone is sending me a question here because my Zoom froze. But any other comments from anyone in the panel about what does it need to happen to accelerate responsible investment? Anything you didn't touch on that you want to mention before I move to the next question?
One quick comment, building on what Leon just said. I think you hit the head on the nail that ESG overall, it's interrelated, it's correlated with each other. You cannot be solving social justice issues and not see, you know, the climate interrelated with that. So I think when investors are looking holistically at ESG, they're making a stand for, they need to look equally at each portion of a company and how they're related. And that will help not just resolving environmental issues, only to find the social issues intensified or worsened. It's about finding a balance and being able to resolve all three at a very balanced and in a balanced way.
Absolutely. Okay, so we have a question here. Can you speak about efforts towards comprehensive corporate reporting? For example, the WEF metrics, which I think it means the white paper the WEF published last month, supported by the Big Fours.
Yeah.
We'll start, Alexa. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy to dive in here. The WEF, the World Economic Forum, released consolidated an initiative that seeks to consolidate ESG metrics. You know, this helps to address the issue that you mentioned earlier, Maria Jose, the alphabet soup of ESG raters, rankers, and of course the data that's coming out of companies, and how do you separate the noise from material data that can inform your investment decisions. So going back to the World Economics Forum's initiative, it's extremely commendable. It's definitely a step in the right direction. Actually, one of CECP's own metrics, total social investment, made it into the final cut of what the metrics are for WEF. So we're very excited about that. But along with that excitement, we are hearing some confusion from companies in terms of what this means. At what point do they shift over and start doing reporting from a consolidated standpoint? And we also, we're on board. Again, it's a commendable effort, but we don't want this to deflect the importance of deeply reporting on your material ESG issues by sector. So while consolidated is good, it's also very important to continue to report out on a deeper layer of your ESG material issues, for example, the ones that SASB identifies at a sector-specific level.
Together with other investment management firms, we have been engaging with the Big Four around accounting for climate. And it's quite an important area, because what we'd want to avoid is the taxpayer picking up the bill for climate change when it's something which is being incurred by industry, in the same way as the taxpayer picked up the bill for the financial crisis, when all those posted profits turned out to be unrealized in the banks. And it's not easy to account for climate change. If you just apply a high discount rate, those decommissioning costs which are happening in 10 years' time, you won't actually see them, but they will come and they will manifest. And it is important to get the accounting right. There's a new group which has come up called, I think, PCAF. They've got their work plan launch tomorrow. It's the Principles of Carbon Accounting Finance, which is looking at this area. Because if these costs hit the accounts, then behaviors will change in companies and will change amongst investors.
I guess my concern is that, while all of the different targets and all of the different accounting processes are all very laudable, the danger is that we just get so lost in all these different standards, and there's so many different places to report and to report different things and almost to hide. So the real risk is that we end up with too many here, rather than just having a pretty clear and easily understood set of metrics that everybody just gets on and does it, because we're just running out of time so fast. We've only got 30 years to do this, and the reality is that we can spend forever tidying up our desks or getting ready to make sure we're reporting the right stuff, but in the meantime we're getting deeper and deeper into the problem. So I think that businesses really have to push their platform and just get on and do it right now, I think, is my feeling. And it may not sit it may not sit exactly comfortably with the investment community, but I think that's the reality. We've got to just push ahead, because that's the level of problem we have now.
No, it's really comfortably with me and our firm. We want action, not the measurement of past action and plans. It's the action which is going to make a difference to the investors we both serve. So no, completely agree with you there, David.
Can I just add something? I mean, I think I echo what David says. I think as well, the everything that's happening from a reporting perspective. So obviously the WEF, IBC project sort of is seeking to bring together some of the other frameworks, but then you've got other people doing the same thing. So it feels at the moment as if now you've got this proliferation of different organizations trying to bring together the different frameworks, and it is a massive distraction. So for us, for now, we're kind of keeping an eye on these various things that are happening, aligning to TCFD, we already aligned to GRI, aligning to SASB, and then just that's what we're doing for now, and then just see what else happens, because otherwise, I have one person on my team who does this full time anyway, and I could probably have 5.
So Catherine, if we were engaging with you as Intercontinental's investor, we would be wanting you to tell us your story about what you're doing to address your waste, your water, your energy efficiency. Yeah. That's what we'd be really interested in. And then once once the measurement framework comes out, then I'm hoping that what you've done will fall nicely into it. And quite frankly, if some elements of it just serve box ticking, then we would encourage you not to fill those bits in.
Yeah, and that's what we do. I mean, we have a standalone responsible business report, and in the back we have the various tables that link back. And so I think we're going to take the IBC and see how we would align to that based on what we report today.
Excellent. So we keep hearing about a gap between investors and corporates. Even this morning, the CFO of a big company was asking, do we need to do an education piece to the sustainability professionals about how to engage with investors? Some sustainability professionals say, you think I talk art and you talk science when you talk ESG. You say tomato, I say tomato. So I'm interested to know if the panel thinks there is a gap, and if there is a gap, how to bridge it, and particularly how smaller organizations, corporates who perhaps are not FTSE 100 or the equivalents in other stock exchange, with smaller teams can approach that. Should we start then with, I don't know, David, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I understand the challenge this is for the smaller companies, because the danger is, and the risk here is, that we spend so long lining everything up so that everybody can understand it, or so we're reporting in the formats that are requested. And meantime, this fire is burning. This is almost like, you know, should I put this fire out with water, with foam, or with hail on? I mean, meantime, the fire is burning and the house is burning down. So I just think that we need to just come to a simplified set of metrics that that everybody understands, that are applicable across the planet, and then let's just report on those and sign up on those. So I'm probably on the more immediate action side of the fence rather than being perfect on the reporting, to be frank.
And MJ, may I come in? I mean,
Yes.
before I came into my current role, I was head of investor relations at IHG for a long time, and I think that what you forget when you're working at a company is actually a lot of investors don't know the day-to-day of what you're doing. So back to Leon's point about telling the story, I think everybody can tell a good story about the actions they're taking, and just developing that, you know, that narrative around, you know, where they're focusing their efforts. I don't, you know, you take it for granted that people really understand what you're doing, but investors are looking at many companies every day. So I think having a clear articulation of what you're doing in this space is a really good starting point.
Excellent.
On that note, yeah, so just building on what Catherine's mentioned, I mean, CEO Investor Forum was founded on the basis that there is a gap. And everything we do works towards closing the gap, minding the gap, no pun intended. But it's truly to help companies and empower them through the tools and resources we offer to own their narrative. And understand, before you own it, you really need to understand what is the market perception, what are investors currently, what do they have access to in terms of your data, and how are they perceiving you, and whether that affects you getting into their portfolio or not. So once you have an understanding of where you stand in the ESG landscape and the market perception, then you can make the changes you need to again own your narrative and more effectively communicate your long-term plan to investors. So we have our annual flagship event, which is actually, because we've gone virtual a few times a year now, where CEOs from large cap companies can share their long-term strategies on a platform directly to investors. So through that, we're really hoping to close that gap, and we serve as a bridge to connect the corporate perspective with the investor perspective so that they can, you know, progress in a more aligned way.
Fantastic. And I know you have trillions of assets under management attending those events, which are fantastic. I would love to do one in London.
Absolutely.
Leo, thoughts?
Not much to add to what's already been said. I mean, there are structural reasons why there is that gap. I think if I gave a challenge to our own industry, so whenever we as Federated Hermes goes and sees a company, we'll be going with both the investment and sustainability capabilities together with a unified agenda. That's not always the case in our industry. I think I've had a number of companies who've complained to me that they see the fund manager on one day and then they see the corporate governance and then maybe sustainability people at another time, and the company doesn't know whether they're coming or going in terms of the messages they're coming from the company. So I think it's really important that we on our side integrate our different skills and competences to present a unified message to what we're looking for from the companies we invest in. I think that's important to bridge the gap.
Thank you.
If I might just underline what Leon and Alexa are saying, because really they're in such a powerful position. They really are the keepers of trust here. You know, the tasks that their businesses do are the ones who make sure that there's no greenwashing, that make sure that the measures that we all need measured are the ones that we're looking at. So it's just such a powerful role they play. And sometimes there's a disconnect between the investing and the the perception of where the reality of where the rubber hits the road, but they're the keepers of trust, of the planet's trust, really.
Thank you. We appreciate that. I would just add to that point. Sorry, Maria Jose. I would just add to that point. No company is perfect, and we get a lot of companies that come to us and say, we don't even know where to start, or we're in a brown industry. How do we change our perception and really own our narrative? And to that, we say, investors, believe it or not, don't think you're going to change overnight. What they're looking for is effort, which eventually leads to progress. And that is all reflected in your reporting. That's the one place you can really showcase your efforts and the progress that you're making. And again, we provide the platform for them to do that directly, but it's really about taking away the stigma for companies that you need to, again, change overnight or present this perfect case, because then you fall into the trap of potentially greenwashing. Every company has challenges. Depending on the industry, they are similar challenges or they're completely different, but it does take time to address those.
Thank you. Question for Leon. Sorry, did I interrupt someone? Because I can't see you on camera. No, I didn't. Leon, regarding consumer education, which is a point you made, is it a level playing field when marketing budgets are working against responsible consumer decision making?
So is the question, if the question's asking, should we forego short-term profit from a marketing campaign which encourages carbon inefficient products and services, then I would say that's quite short-term, and that one should think for the interests of one's consumers and one's license to operate in society, and invest in that consumer education. I think for a utility company, it is right and proper that they educate their consumers on how to be more energy efficient. Now you would say, well, that reduces the amount of money we're making, but actually it sets you up much better for the long term. So we would say consumer education is not necessarily a level playing field, but it's really important that it happens and everyone plays their part in doing it.
Thank you. We are 1 minute from finishing, and the last intervention, I'm going to ask Alexa to share one thought before we finish. But before I pass the floor to her, I want to thank you all. You were a fantastic panel. Thank you for all your inputs, your insights, and thank you all of you who joined us today. We will be sharing the recording and material afterwards. So Alexa, over to you for the last thoughts of the afternoon in London and the morning in the US.
Thank you. Thank you so much again, Business in the Community, for partnering with us for this event. And of course, our esteemed panelists, thank you for the great conversation. I guess a last thought would just be, keep an eye out for the emerging ESG indices. You have great ones emerging from BlackRock, their impact shares. And of course, you have Morningstar and Dow Jones Sustainability Index. And the reason why I'm raising this, again, a bit last minute, is mainly because of how corporates are trying to adjust and meet the expectations to be involved and partake in these indexes as well.
Excellent. Thank you all, and bye-bye. Bye.